And we've named the reading circle after her. And we usually meet once a month. It used to be the third Thursday, but we try to accommodate everybody's schedule, especially if we have a guest speaker like we do tonight. But I think she more so is accommodating me because I had something going on for the third Thursday of the month. But anyway, we're really glad to have you here. And Doctor, which he doesn't like me calling her, but Dr. Millicent Brown. And what I usually do is start off with a bio. But hopefully if you've read this book, and as you can see, I have stickies all over. Because there were so many things that, yeah, really. I've known Dr. Brown for 20 years, and I've known her professionally. I'm proud to say that her collection was the first collection that I processed the summer of 2005 as a grad student before I was actually hired here at Avery. So wow, time flies. So I wanted to say I've known you professionally, but I didn't know that you have lived a life, which is illustrated in this book. But just to give you a primer, if you are new to Dr. Brown, she's a retired associate professor of history at Claflin University, having taught at several other institutions of higher education as well. She is a lifelong community advocate and spokesperson for improvements in historically and currently exploited neighborhoods and communities of color. I like that. She consults with museums, historical sites, and organizations seeking more accurate analysis of social justice initiatives. She has also written numerous essays, and we hold her dissertation, Civil Rights Activism in Charleston, South Carolina, 1940 to 1970. She has also written essays in The Spirit of an Activist, the life and work of Isaiah D. Quincy Newman, and her crush, Matthew J. Perry, The Man, the Times, and His Legacy. And she's probably smiling because it's in the book. So we're going to do, this is our format for tonight. Dr. Brown has been on the book circuit, and I wanted to do something a little bit different. And since Avery means so much to her, Avery Institute, because her father attended here, and your grandma, and her sister, and Dr. Brown was one of the first staff employees, which you'll see in a minute. Because we're going to do something a little bit different as far as a book talk goes. Since we are archive, and I mentioned I'm a processing archivist and I process her collection, meaning I put it in some kind of logical formation, created a finding aid, which is really an inventory of the documents and photographs that she has in her collection and making them accessible to researchers. All that being said, we have the unique position of holding not only her papers, but her father's and mother's papers, and several of Dr. Brown's initiative, somebody had to do it. So I asked Dr. Brown if it was okay to pull some things from our collection and other places in relationship to the book. So we're first starting out with 270 Ashley Avenue, which is really important because that was the hub of not only being a home, but for civil rights and NAACP activity. So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about what this means to you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So many of you have already heard me talk about this book. And so I really told Georgette, I really appreciate that we're going to do it just a little differently tonight. I hope we'll have a few minutes if there are any specific questions for those of you who have read or maybe anticipate reading the book that you may want to put that I don't cover. Please, I hope we'll have a chance to do a little bit of that. The book starts with trying to describe a house, a household, and to build on the idea that when you are born and to whom you are born is really basic for all of us. And while over the many years, I have certainly appreciated the attention that my father received for his work in community organizing and activism, and some of the contributions of my siblings as well as myself. It's always important to remind folks that we were right there in the middle of the 20th century, you know, and it doesn't always get addressed as doing regular things and being a regular family, at least trying to be a regular family. Sometimes it has been talked about in very lofty terms about the bravery of the activists and whatever. And I deliberately started this book trying to just help people understand what it's like to be of color, to be Black in Charleston, you know, in the 40s and the 50s, having some real privileges that were not afforded everybody Black. So let's make some distinctions here. I've spent a lot of my life being almost apologetic for the benefits that I derived from having educated parents. I had educated grandparents, you know, and so I came to grips in this chapter and the second one that just said, get over it, Millicent. You came with some benefits and you're proud of your community. Stop trying to relate so much to the struggle that you act as if that's not important. And so 270 just tries to say, here we are in this house with a father, because of the good fortune of having had who was my grandfather, who was an independent landowner that allowed my father, after graduating from Avery and South Carolina State College, to come back home and not be dependent on white people for an income. And so as someone who was in real estate, My father and people like him were able to assert themselves in ways that the average working Black person was not able. My friends were school teachers' children, some of them, working class children. We knew everybody, and people brought different things to the table. And 270 was able to be a meeting place. It was a congregating place for people who sometimes had to come at night so they wouldn't be seen associating with us, you know. I remember the NAACP magazine. Some of you may have seen copies of it. It was called The Crisis. And so many people who were not as independent as our family would have all of their, and you got a crisis if you joined the NAACP, first of all, by paying your national dues. But nobody wanted to have the magazine delivered to their home because they would be identified with the organization. So I remember at 270 going out and having a stack of crisis magazines like this delivered all, regardless of the name, they were all delivered to 270 Ashley Avenue. You know, and people would then come by the house to get their copies of The Crisis, you know, that kind of shenanigans. But when you're a child and you kind of grow up with that, you just kind of learn some of the deal. You just kind of learn some of the ploys. And I take time to describe 270 as a safe place where my grandmother, my parents just made it clear that if you came to this porch, you could sit in a way angled so that you couldn't be seen from the street. And I just, those are the kinds of memories that I wanted to just sort of share with people, that we were a regular family doing some different things, but being supported by so many people that we were living around. And our little unique place just needs to be understood, especially by young people. You know, thank you for the accolades that are given to my father, but, you know, he knew what it meant to work with Herbert DaCosta and Dr. Hoffman and all the other folks that were, and Herbert Fielding, with the, you know, other independent Black people who were given that opportunity to assert themselves with their activities, with their dollars. But when they often were free to do so in ways that so many other Black folks were not able to. I'd like to talk about, in those first couple of chapters, about my experiences with my friends, those of whom had parents who were in the school system or who worked for white families. They might have been domestic workers, you know, and just try to help people understand the Black community is complex. It's made up of all different kinds of income levels, educational levels, but to appreciate something, and I don't mean to sound romantic about it, but to appreciate that where there was something lacking in one home, 2 doors over, you probably picked up on it from somebody else. I tell the story, and I'm sorry, because I'm not sure this is in the book or not. I forget sometimes. But one of the stories I tell about 270 or talk about is there was someone who I will never name, but whose father was an independent Black business person. And he wasn't the smartest person in the world. And then there was my good girlfriend, whose father literally was a garbage collector, who was smart as all get out. Well, see, we remember the time when who your daddy was didn't determine what kind of grades you got in school. You see, and I want to remind people of those eras that, the teachers loved us and they pushed us. Some of us were good students, some of us were not. But we were just a composite of a community that, with all the ills that segregation put on us, we were functioning, we were sharing, and we carried burdens. We 270 was on the west side of town. That is where more of middle-class Blacks were living. So then we get into the class divide. We had to live with that. I found out way late in life that I didn't know why so many light-skinned Black folks lived on my street. I know that my parents weren't choosing their neighbors based on skin color, but it's true. A whole bunch of light-skinned Black folks lived on Ashley Avenue. Then years later, I understood some of the historical reasons that Black communities had been divided ever since the end of slavery. Then why certain advantages given to certain families meant that people congregated and were relegated to certain parts of town. You know, trying to dig into and beyond some of the myths and the divisions that we had to contend with in our Black communities. And yes, there was class consciousness, there was colorism. It didn't destroy us, but it did offer challenges. And my first couple of chapters in the book tried to say, let me tell you about 270, because it's all of that, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And I'd like to make note of the watercolor that was created by a neighbor, where they was Andrea Hazel. And the project that she was working on is a series, and you can go on her website where I retrieved this from. And she did portraits of demolished houses and structures during the 1960s for the creation of one I-26, which was known as a crosstown, which is now known as Septima Clark Expressway. Unfortunately, this house was demolished. The Brown's house was demolished, and the letters next to it, I'm going to go ahead and read it. The State Highway Department was written in 1964. Dear Mr. Brown, we have been informed by the right-of-way engineer that you are to vacate the building at the corner of Ashley Avenue and Kennedy Street, 60 days from November 12, 1964. Please notify this office at the above address when you plan to vacate so we can inspect the building and pick up the keys for the same.
First of all, let's understand that it was a phenomenon happening throughout the country, that intact Black communities, mixture of income levels, were being decimated for bridges, highways, crossroads, and whatever. The sad thing about this happening in Charleston for us as a family, but as a community, was that these were not all dilapidated houses by any stretch of the imagination. My grandfather, who was a contractor, had built this house. And I'm going to admit that Andrea and I have talked about this. Some of her renderings of those homes on the west side, we remember them a little differently. Let's put it that way. Surely there were some that were worthy of being torn down, supposedly anyway. But there there were such stately homes. We were right around the corner from the original Dart Hall Library, where many of us grew up, you know. And I have kind of challenged Andrea a little bit that and she's such a fantastic artist, but I kind of want her to expand some of the representation, because those houses did not all look that dilapidated the way the Department of Transportation tried to say, which for me gave an excuse for how you got rid of that community. And I kind of I said, you know, Hucky, and I'm sorry, she'll die, but that's what we always called Andrea, Hucky.
And it's in the book.
Yeah, right. You know, it's like, Hucky, let's make sure we let people appreciate that beyond those buildings, you know, there were these stately homes as well, mixed in with some that were dilapidated. And are we sure we're conveying the real context of this city and of Black communities in this city? And don't fall into this idea that, well, we had to get rid of all these ramshackle buildings in order for urban renewal, as it was being called, you know, at the time. So I don't remember my house looking quite like that. I saw it as a majestic mansion. I don't know, Walter. I mean, I don't know. Your house was right down the street. You were right around the corner, Lachey. You know, there are folks in this room that, you know, we just have different kind of memories of what the Black community of Charleston really looked like. And I thought my father's Volkswagen was really sharp looking. It looks a little bit, a little bit out of sorts there, but you know, it might have well have been a Cadillac as far as I was concerned, because we were riding around the state and I was his travel partner. And so I rode in that Volkswagen, you know, and you know, I thought I was, you know, high cotton, you know.
Well, speaking of your father, let's go to the next slide if I can. Oops. Okay, we're going to talk about the Charleston movement with the Blacklist. And then I found this in our vertical file, the Charleston movement, the specific aims and goals of the movement. So, I mean, everything seems to come back, or it's never left.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about boycotting Target and so.
And February 28th, I think some of you have seen it on social media, is being designated as a day to spend as little money as you possibly can. Try to make a statement about the strength of the Black dollar and our allies as well. Because if you're not Black, you can still join us in that. But going back to the 60, what's the date on that, 63?
63 on the aims and goals of the movement.
Yeah, yeah. One of the parts of what is deemed the civil rights movement, not only in Charleston, but everywhere, one of the aspects that I have always lamented that has been downplayed is the economic aspect. You know, it didn't start in the 60s. There were boycotts and strikes, you know, in the 40s as well. You know, people understood that even before Montgomery, you know, if you keep your money, people start paying attention to you. Charleston was doing that as well. And so while we think of the civil rights activities, especially locally, as being the effort to integrate, it was also how to speak with your pocketbook. And so a number of the things that you will find in my father's collection have to do with appealing to people, you know, stay out of Crest, stay out of Woolworth, do not shop on King Street, you know. And this went on for summer after summer, year after year. This was not a one-shot deal. Did everybody follow that and agree with it? No. And there were folks that were put on the corner, young people that stood there jotting down the names of the Black folks who went into those stores when we had called for a boycott, embarrassing people if it came to that. But just holding people accountable. No. And one of the slogans was, don't buy where you cannot eat. Don't buy where you cannot work. Because the other thing was, why are you giving these merchants your money and you can't work there? They will not hire you except maybe in the stockroom if you're lucky. But it was many years into the movement that we started getting some of the first salespeople, hired. I ask people never, ever talk about the civil rights movement without questioning the economic impact. I'm involved because of my replacing my sister as the original plaintiff in the case that desegs the schools. But I'm having to remind people that was never a movement to just integrate. It was always about no pot of Black money paid for Black schools and white money paid for white schools. It didn't work that way. All the money went in the same pot. The Black schools just didn't get their share. So when we're going into these schools, I remember being brought before the Board of Education. They wanted to question, why do I want to leave my school? They asked me, don't you like your school, Millicent? I'm in 7th grade at the time when I'm brought before the board. And they want to know, well, don't you like your teachers, And I'm saying, yes, I like my teachers very much. And then it dawned on me what they were trying to do. They were trying to get me to say to them that there's really no reason for me to want to change schools. And so as I put in the book, I said, my mama didn't make no fool here now. So when they asked me, well, if you like your teachers, you like your classmates and everything, why would you want to leave your friends? I responded with, I make friends wherever I go. you know but the idea being, I'm not going here about the children. I'm going here because I have never seen a school locker in my entire, at that point I was in 7th grade. By the time I actually got into Rivers, I was in 10th grade. But we had to take PE, but we didn't have showers. And we had biology labs that had almost no facilities for doing the most basic of our science experiments, so it was always about resources. I ask you all, make sure you add that whenever you talk about the civil rights movement, because we cannot have people thinking that we somehow were so bad off in our Black schools that if we don't go to school with white kids, we can't be well educated. And I see some faces of people who are old like me in this room. We know the quality of our Black schools. And it was about resources not being available, not that in order to be smart, you got to go to school with a white kid or be taught by a white teacher, because that's dangerous. That is the height of white supremacy if you let people think that that's what the movement was about. So,
well, no, that's fine. You did a wonderful segue into a chapter that's in the book, but in your collection that I processed back in 2005. Yes, I'm very proud of processing this collection. Is the Dippity
I
Doo.
didn't know what the big deal was. She keeps saying that, but I didn't understand what it was that you thought was so exciting. I really didn't. Yeah.
The Dippity Doo revolution, or grown folks don't have a clue.
Want me to talk about that?
Now, so yeah, this is in the collection. It's just 2 pages where she expands in the book. But it seems you start off the same way. It's Georgette was Mama's best friend, and you go on. And I guess what attracted me is because I'm of that age. I grew up in the 60s. but my mother refused to put dippity-doo in my hair.
Oh, okay.
She considered that for
Does
white
anybody
people.
know what dippity-doo is?
No, no, it's like a hair gel.
You remember, it was a blue gel that folks, and I have two older sisters, and my older sister Jonelle was already in college when I was going to Rivers in 63. And you know, all the college girl stuff, you know, she was a classmate. Y'all were in the same class, weren't you? You were ahead of her? Okay. Well, she was good friends with Norma. And the idea that I was letting my older sister take charge, she had not left for school yet when school opened for me. And so she was going to be in charge of what for so many girls then and now is the most important part of your appearance, and that's your hair. And we were straightening our hair at the time, you know, this is pre-Afro days or whatever. And Jonelle decides she's going to bring this dippity-doo stuff and do my hair. And this is the night or the day before we're going to be going into these schools. Now, remember, it's 11 of us that are going to be dispersed among four different schools the next day, September 4th, 1963. And we're having this backyard, whatever, feast in my mother's best friend's yard. But she lives right behind Rivers High School. Now, I'm going to the school the next day. I didn't even know where Rivers High School was. It was nowhere near Ashley Avenue. It was nowhere near Burke High School. So I really didn't even have a concept of where I was going the next day. But it just turned out you could see the school from Johnette's backyard. And I start thinking about what's going to happen the next day. Jonelle has my hair all rolled up in these big old rollers, you know.
Were they pink?
Huh?
Were they pink?
They were probably pink. I got to think about that. They're probably pink. But and you had these rods that stuck down in your scalp to keep them in place.
Yeah.
But she has dippity-dooed me, you know, and I'm there thinking about the next day, and it gets a little serious. And my father starts talking about telling my mother that the police have promised that they're not going to let people, you know, cause any trouble. The SLED agents are going to be there. The mayor has put forth this call that, you know, he's not going to let any foolishness happen, you know. So he's trying to reassure my mother that things are going to be okay the next day. We don't know, you know, but you got to remember, South Carolina always wanted to make sure they were not Mississippi or Alabama. So the faith we had in our police chief was based on the fact that he did not want South Carolina being talked about the way things had gone badly in other southern states. So that was our kind of respite, what I call it. It was a way that we felt more comfortable that it's probably not going to be really violent, you know, but we hope anyway. And it turned out it was not. But all I'm thinking about is what my hair is going to look like. You know, I mean, that's really all. And my mother's going on about this, and my father's going on about the police and the newspapers that are going to be there and everything. And all I'm thinking is, am I going to be an embarrassment to all Black people in America? Because that's all I can think of, that this dippity-doo thing is not going to work. And I'm going to have what at the time was called kinky hair. And before that was popular, you know, and it's like, that's all I'm thinking about. And that's the title was, you know, the dippity-doo revolution, you know, or grown-ups don't have a clue, because they had no idea what I was really experiencing that night, you know. If you see our paper the next day, the hair turned out just fine. You know, it really did. I didn't embarrass, you know, Black folks around the world.
And you were on the front page of the New York Times. So that's That's
Yeah.
national.
Yeah, that was
And
kind of.
you have the
I hate
image.
that picture. I hate that picture. And I will tell y'all that anytime. I hate that picture because I'm smiling there and all I'm seeing is that picture will never reflect what was going on in my stomach, what was going on in my head, in my heart, you know. It just looks like everything is fine. And that's why it's on the front page of the New York Times, because the caption is that things went smoothly. And in fact, we did not have the horrors that you heard about in other places. We were not like Little Rock, you know, and Central High School and all that. And so, you know, I don't want to in any way suggest otherwise. But then that's what has been on my mind and heart and conscience and professional plate for so long is no, we didn't get anything other than maybe a few bomb threats. We did get those, which were frightening and what have you, but the violence level was quite minimal. But do we understand the impact on young children who are being asked? I was one of the oldest in the case. One student, Ralph Dawson, was a senior. He went to Charleston High. Then there was me in 10th grade, and the rest were all in 8th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd grade. And the idea of what is the impact, even if people aren't shooting at you, you know, bombs aren't necessarily going off, but do you understand that there is an emotional toll to asking children to change the minds and hearts of the nation? And while our experiences were not horrendous, there is still unpacking to be done and is still going on, which I think kind of might take you to, well, maybe I skipped over a part.
Yeah, yeah, because we're going to talk about Avery, but I do have a question, and we will allow for
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
I neglected to say that I also, once we only have, I think, 2 more slides, I want to talk about chapter 13 and chapter 14,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
initiatives that's happening here in Charleston, and where do we go from here in chapter 14? That's how I turned it in your view. You mentioned that you had contacted a colleague, interracial colleague, he was white, to ask him from Columbia to go to your prom, but you sort of left it out that, well, what was the reaction of your fellow students
For
and
those who haven't read
faculty?
it, it was like, this is my senior year. Well, first of all, I need to back up. My junior year, I was determined, okay, I'm going to go to the prom. Uh, if anybody thought, as I had been hearing, that I somehow like light-skinned girl going to school with these white kids and, you know, as if there was some whatever to that, you know. I wanted to make sure that folks understood how I identified. And I recruited somebody my junior year who was as black as tar. And I said, Tony, you are taking me to the prom because I want them to understand I ain't trying to not be black. Okay. So let's just get this out here right now. Okay. That was junior year. Senior year, I thought to myself, I don't remember exactly how this came to me, but I said, I've been playing it low for years. For 3 years, I've been putting up with the mess that these kids are putting on me. The ostracism, the marginalization, the all of it, you know. What is my statement going to be to Rivers as I leave as a senior? And I thought about it, and I didn't tell my parents, but I called a young fellow that had worked with us in the South Carolina Human Relations Commission, which was one of those interracial groups that was set up to deal with race in the state. And I called him and I said, will you take me to the prom? And this white fellow said, yeah. And I describe it a little bit in the book. It was that was not meant for the Black community to know. I didn't tell any of my friends because was so afraid that folks would think that I was somehow, again, associating being with white people with something to be so proud of, you know, and that was just so not where I was coming from, you know. But I invited Brad because I knew that all those teachers and those kids that didn't want Black kids, they feared that Black and white folks gonna get along. They gonna actually get along one day. And I said, you know something? I got some back at you coming. And I invited, and I can remember, we had a horrible time. He couldn't dance. Um, you know, nobody talked to us. You know, it was not fun. You know, it was not fun by a long shot. But it was my gotcha moment, you know. And I saw the look of horror on those teachers' faces when I walked in, you know. And it seems kind of silly now, but I explain it because I was so sure that that people would think I was doing it as a sort of a pride. And I was really thinking, what is the most egregious thing I can do for all these people who don't want us to get along? You know, and that turned out to be it. Folks were so mad at me. I don't think anybody talked to me that night and for several days afterwards, you know. And the teachers, you know, you could just see the indignant look on their faces, you know. Um, I had fun with that. I really did. I have to admit, you know, it was like, what, you know, I want to say something back to y'all, you know, and so that was my little get back at you.
Well, had to put in something that's Avery related.
Yeah.
And you were one of the first staffers here at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture as the director of exhibits and museum education. So you was only here for a year, correct?
Oh, honey, don't
All
ask
right.
me now.
Duh.
I don't know.
You traveled. You traveled.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, no,
Yeah.
I was here. See, I was here
Yeah.
as probably the youngest person who was a part of the creation of the Avery Research Center. I had dropped out of college and had moved back for a while trying to get my bearings. And you were here. Were y'all here when Avery got created? Had y'all moved back yet? Oh, not, okay. There's probably nobody here in this room now that was here at that time when we were trying to figure out what do you do at 125 Bull Street? There were lots of suggestions. Some people wanted to turn it into an operational school. Some people wanted to turn it into a museum. Some people wanted it to be a historic site. There were just lots of ideas. And, you know, to their credit, folks said, no, it's got to be something living and viable and nothing wrong with museums, but we need something that's just much more alive. And so the decision was that it become a research center, an archive. And I was just a young pup at the table. And because I'm in between and trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And I had never gone to Avery, although I'd loved it and I knew about Avery, but they were trying to get more young people involved in those conversations. I will remember forever that I argued with Mrs. Whipper. I really did. I was one of the ones that said, y'all don't want to be all up under the College of Charleston, because when y'all do that, you know, you're going to have controls coming at you every which way. And the expedient thing, and maybe perhaps the most logical thing to do was to create this research center under the guise of the college. One of the things that was said was that they're not, I remember this, there are not enough chicken dinners that we can have to support this effort. And that sentiment bothers me to this day, because it was a statement that said, we don't trust the Black community to be able to support its own institutions. I don't believe that, but it was the feeling that it was more expedient to go with the college, get the state money, get the money that would flow through. You know, the jury is out whether it was a good or a bad decision. The point was, I was one of the youngest voices there saying, no, no, let's make this thing be Black owned, Black controlled, you know. I don't trust the state of South Carolina, you know. And so, but I was nothing but proud to be a part later on as one of the early staff people, and to see this thing over the years evolve into what it is today. It's just really very meaningful. Yeah.
So thank you
I'm
for your
not-
contribution.
Well, I'm not sure how long I stayed, but we did some, I mean, we
Yeah.
did, you know, on a small scale, what y'all have been doing for so many years, the wonderful exhibits that you have. But I was reminding Darren earlier of some of the early exhibits that we had, but it was more than that. It was convincing people that this was important and that Avery was important. Resurrecting the history of the school is important. Why it is that folks didn't even know. And see, my life in this building is very, very expanded. I went to the College of Charleston and finally and graduated. And my first job was at Trident Technical College, which was housed in this building. So I come to this building knowing about Avery, but it's Trident Tech. And I know the stories that my father had told me about when Avery tried to become a college and the city would not endorse it. And before you knew it, the school was closed and the kids got transferred to Burke, and you know, and it becomes, and my father's expression was, they claimed that it was unsafe as a building, the structure was unsafe, and he used to say, and they didn't drive a damn nail. And the next day after Avery was vacated, it was Palmer Secretarial School, you know. And he always, I grew up hearing that story that, you know, no, they did not want the excellence of Avery to be expanded. So I knew it then as Trident Tech. I then came back to work with the founding of the research center, and then came back as a staff member, and then started teaching in the summers, you know. This, when people wonder why I feel about the way I do about this place, it's because it has so many reiterations for me
Right.
that I just appreciate, you know.
Well, we appreciate you and everything that you've done. I've on occasion, I've referred several students to you in, you know, in regards to certain aspects of Charleston history or just,
Sure.
you know, American history. And you've always been there to, you know, to help them out. So we appreciate
Don't
that.
start the eulogy yet now.
I'm not.
But you go, let me go, and I didn't mean to take quite
Okay,
so
and
long.
we know, and we could, the top part is cut off, but this is on Dr. Brown's initiative. Somebody had to do it. A children's retrospective on the process of U.S. school desegregation. And this was a project that you started at Claflin.
I really started it when I taught at North Carolina A&T. And then when I moved to Claflin to teach for several years, I got a little bit more support. But the idea being that, as I referred to earlier, the idea was we are not collecting the stories of this phenomenon called school desegregation. I am talking about it all the time, that while we were not shot at particularly, people are somehow equating, well, if you don't get killed, then everything was okay. You know, and it's my challenge is to not having that oversimplification. When children from K through 12 are at their most vulnerable stages of their own personality development. We are asking them to take on this burden of social change. And I think young people around the world often are asked to do it. There's nothing unique about that. But I think we need to appreciate that just because we weren't shot at or brutalized physically or whatever, the impact psychologically and emotionally is nothing to play with. I have often said that if thousands and thousands of white children had gone through a phenomenon at the same time like we did, there would be data. The social scientists would have done research on it. You know, the psychologists would have looked into it. You know, we would analyze marriage patterns and career paths. I mean, we'd want to know their bathroom habits. You know, we would follow because we would recognize it as a phenomenon. We talk about school deseg as a historical and a political science phenomenon. I want the psychologists, the sociologists, the anthropologists to get into it, and the educators to get into it. What happened to the children? Well, it's been a year now. In this very room, there was an opportunity that the surviving ones of us from the 1963 case met in this room and were interviewed by Adam Parker from the Post and Courier. And we talked about what our experiences were like for the first time in 60 years. We had never met and discussed what the personal impact had been. And one of them, who I had often said, please come on out, Gail, talk about what you went through. You were in 4th grade, you know, and she never would. We sat here, we laughed, we cried, but she said, I needed this. All these years, I have never talked about the impact of what going to James Simmons School had on me. And so that's what this project is about. The way that this school deseg thing affected boys was often very different from girls. Rural was very different from urban. High school kids was very different from elementary school. You know, just the kinds of things that we need to say if we're going to explore this period of history that we call civil rights. I believe these children's narratives need to be collected. And fortunately, when I left Claflin, I brought that project and Avery has accepted it, and it's an ongoing work that we're continuing to do. We are collecting, and we got to do it quickly because a bunch of us are not around anymore. And so if you would imagine there were 11 of us in that case in 63, the 5 of us that met are the survivors. I think that's a weird statistic. Yes, 6 are dead, and with one exception, they were all younger than me. I don't know. I'm not trying to do cause and effect, but I want to ask, and who else is somehow struggling, and who else is not living out their whole lifetime? I don't know, but those are the kinds of things that good social science should be exploring, I think. And let us never be glib about what that experience really was all about. Yeah.
And many of those interviews are located on our Low Country Digital Library, which is access that's free. There's no paywall. You can, tap into that and listen to those.
And now,
This is that was the last slide. So I'd like to talk about the last 2 chapters. The whole book is powerful, but you're bringing it home with these last 2 chapters. Change is not always progress. The more things change, the more ... And remembering the past, imagining the future. So in chapter 13, change is not always progress. You know numerous people, including some of our own, Darren Lee Calhoun the third. No, I'm sorry, the second, and Erica Veal as being our strong activists here. Yeah, Josh and Paul Gabarini. He's looking at me like, aren't you going to talk about me? Name dropping. No, there's a lot of name dropping in this.
Name drop.
Yeah, but yeah, you've known and met a lot of people in your life, but focusing on this chapter.
Well, and this chapter was also an attempt to say that I wrote this as a memoir, was never meant to be a history book per se. I've done a lot of academic writing in my life, and it was like, that's not the audience that I really wanted to get to. I really wanted a broader audience. And so the memoir was to try to make the point that I had the great fortune of having started my life as a little bitty kid in a home that was sensitive to social justice, okay? But I kept growing and kept challenging, and I kept moving around the country. And my simple answers that I had to things just got blown out. And so the book was meant to just say to people, be careful of your simple answers. I used to think that the problem was Black versus white. Then I started growing and I got exposed to international and global issues. And I realized, this thing ain't always just about color. Power is something that you can have oppressive Black people, yeah, you can have progressive white people, So let's be careful when we come up with these labels, that are so little. Here I am. I'm so frustrated with Rivers. I leave Charleston because I am determined. I'm going north to freedom. I'm going north to freedom. I'm getting out of South Carolina, and was never called nigger so many times as when I went to school in Boston. And that's like, that blew that other simplicity. I thought, then I had to understand what white supremacy meant around the country and the world. And then I said, okay, I'm tired of Boston after a while. It's cold up here. These white folks ain't no better than the ones I left. I'm leaving. I'm going to a Black school. Okay. I go to Spelman, run into some of the most conservative thinking in the, but it's like, wait a minute, y'all, this ain't right. All this simplistic thinking, these answers that I had to be challenged, and I've been doing it all my life. So by the time we get to chapter 13, all I'm trying to say to folks is be careful. Keep asking the questions, because something has African American in its name, don't make it right. Don't make it good, you've got to just keep on with the elevating of the questions. And I came back to Charleston, and while we have Black elected officials, for example, and that's all fine and wonderful and something we should continue to work for. But just because somebody's Black didn't make them the best politician or the representative of our community. So we can't do that whole, now we've made progress because we have a Black police chief. No offense to Reuben, but, people hated him in parts of the Black community because he was harder on the Black community than any place else. Greenberg, I'm talking about, may he rest in peace. But as he cleaned up Charleston and helped the crime rate, it all got moved to North Charleston. And then the plight of North Charleston. So it's like, no, y'all, we got to hold people accountable regardless of their color and their station, and not be so easily convinced that just because things look a little different, that change has really occurred. I'm not clear all the time, and I don't propose that anybody knows everything all the time. I just know that my curiosity will follow me to my grave. that I will not be content with those simple analyses. And I just urge us all to keep on, challenge. I spoke the other day at Circular Congregational Church on what was to have been a day to honor Dr. King. The question I posed to that group, as I do all the time, well, where did Dr. King get his philosophies from? Don't make it sound like he came out of nowhere and had all of this, whatever, respect his work, but understand there are all these other Black philosophers who are challenging what freedom and liberation really looks like around the world. And so it is just exciting for me to be as old as I am, but to love to be around all of the young people here at Avery, because they're on it, Low Country Action Committee and all the work that they're doing, that Avery does. We just got to stop being so content with those simple answers. And holding the hands on that bridge did not bring any kind of substantive change for Charleston. We just got to keep on it. Just keep on it, and just don't be afraid to ask those harder questions. It's as simple as that.
Well, speaking of questions, it's that time. We're running a little bit over, but if anybody has any questions, no, it's mutual.
I'm always too long-winded. I apologize.
Questions, comments?
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Brown.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
The question that I have for you is, what do you think, or what for you necessitated the Black Power movement? And what is something that is, or like, what are the things that are distinct from civil rights to Black Power in terms of like paradigmatic shifts?
Yeah.
And what did you find the promise of Black Power to be?
And if any of you were here the other night, when the Low Country Action Committee sponsored the showing of the film about Lowndes County and had Mukasa. Yeah, we knew him as Willie Ricks, and it's still hard for me sometimes to not refer to him as Willie Ricks, but who was a major part of articulating that whole idea of Black Power. The point is, in my lifetime, I have gone from being colored to Negro to Afro-American to African-American. It's this, that there is this progression of thought. And so we thought, and I wish y'all had all known my father. My father really thought that if we would just let the adults get out of the way and let these children get together, we're going to solve these problems. He was very naive about that, but he really believed that. Well, I grew up in that with civil rights kind of integrationist idea. And then once I get away and I start hearing and studying with and under and at the hem of folks that are seeing it more broadly, and it's about where does power come from and who controls your own life and your community, and so I'm expanding. I get to the point where I want to really investigate the Republic of New Africa. I want to know, maybe Black folks are not ever going to become a part of this nation. And there are folks that have been saying that for a long time. And so the idea of reparations, when I was in college, you said reparations, you get laughed out of the room. Y'all ain't never gonna get, that's crazy, And then now there are serious conversations going on, even in the political circles, about the fact that Black folks are owed for the unpaid labor that was given for this country, So it's all about, you can change the terms, and it's just, are you expanding your mindset? And so for me, it's like, it's about a coming to grips that we do have a shared humanity. We really do. And while I, as a Black woman, care very deeply and particularly about my particular Black community, I am not blinded to the fact that I have to understand the wanting of respect, regard, economically, politically, educationally, socially, for everybody on this earth. We have got to find ways to stop the zero-sum game of if I win, you must lose. You know, so that's where my head is. It's like there will be multiple approaches and we will have different ways that we decide to go about it. Some of us are going to leave this country and say, forget it. Others of us are going to say, no, 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 no. My ancestors fought too hard. We're going to stay, you know, until it happens, you know. We are going to go in different directions because I don't have some romantic idea of us all being on the same page. I really don't. I just know that are we clear about what our philosophies are? And are we respectful? I do not believe that you can oppress people because you say you don't want to be oppressed. And we have to hold everybody to that standard. I'm sorry. And I'm really, really finding myself more and more offering up that challenge. It is however we decide in our little circles that we're going to do something, let's get clear. What is the philosophical base upon which we are working? Do we have a philosophical base upon which we are working? Is it fair to all human beings? And whatever tactics we take have to still have a regard for that. And I won't give up on that. I really won't. I'm not as naive as I was when I was 15, but there's still an element to me that says, let's get clarity. Everybody's moaning and groaning about the political stuff that's going on. Yeah, these are not some happy times for a lot of us, but they are times of clarification. They are times of clarification. I believe you either on the right side of humanity or you aren't. And I find that very reassuring. It doesn't make it easy. It's just, I'm clear philosophically where I stand. And I ask that we kind of challenge ourselves to do that and not make excuses. I hope that in some way addresses what you asked. Yeah. Yes, sir, Mr. Al Brown.
It's so great that two of my mentors here, because they both have played a very important part of my life in establishing a tour, my tour company, and writing my book. I don't know, Dr. Brown, I don't know if you remember, but when you were a director here at Avery, you wrote up a tour for, I think, the directors or members of Avery or something. And we said it in the office many days.
That's right.
For about 5 days.
Right.
And the member that you wrote, the dialogue you wrote, is what I still use today on my tour. But I think my tour what it is today.
Good for you.
And
Good for you. Thank you.
That evolved into writing my book. And Dr. Georgette, you're right.
No. I do not have a doctorate.
Huh?
I do not have a doctorate. I had 2 masters though. Let that be known.
That's but remember the man that you said?
Yes.
Avery writing my book and everything. So both got great influence of my life and the way of my life have been
Thank you.
the tour business and the book. Both of them quite successful. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we wish you a lot of luck because we still send people to you. 'Cause
Yes.
you're the #1 tour. You know, I send them to Damon for the walking tour, but you know, definitely you for the
tours.
riding tour. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Yes.
Necessarily have a question? I just have a comment. I've kind of taken up a challenge, some things that you've said to me in meetings where we've been together
Yeah.
discussing issues and
Yeah.
been doing a lot of reading, and a friend of mine shared your book with me as a birthday present. And I've been doing what I might call a masterclass in reading of all kinds of African-American influence books just to accept your challenge. And I wanted to say for your book, after, and I've known you a little bit through some of the things that we've worked on. It's written so wonderfully in your voice. That's what I really enjoyed about the book, was it wasn't just you writing your experience. It was truly in your voice. It was like you were talking to me when I was reading the book. And also, there were some thoughts in my head about your experience that I got from the book that you've articulated tonight. So you taught me something. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I really, as someone who loves the scholarly world, and I love being a college professor for all those many years on those multiple campuses, I am frustrated with continuing to write to the people who read that kind of stuff. I wanted to write something that would have a broader reach. And people like you tell me all the time, you know, that they got it when they read it. They could relate to it or it reminded them of something. When I tell the story of my sister and me getting on the bus in front of our house at 270, you know, people didn't remember until they read it, the part about we would have to go and put the money in and pay, then you had to come off from the front door and go to the back door in order to get on the bus, you know. And folks said, you know, Millicent, I had completely forgotten about that until I read it, you know. So that's what I wanted. I wanted to remind people of some craziness. I wanted people to see contradictions. All Black folks didn't get treated the same. And that was confusing. You know, it was like there's all these strong segregation rules, but then somebody would break it, you know, and it wasn't really that strong. You know, that's confusing. You know, who's in and who's out and who gets by with not having to be, you know, my friend Harriet's mother, who's about your complexion, she would go down to the store and they would make up a mixture of facial makeup for her to brown like her color, even though they weren't serving most Black folks. You know, it's like, how do y'all do it sometimes and sometimes you do, you know? Segregation was crazy, y'all, you know, because it didn't hold true. All you know what I'm talking about, right, Alfonso? You know, some folks got away with things, and then if you knew somebody, then you could slip under, and you know, it just a kind of a wackiness to it. And I wanted to show that wackiness, you know, and say, you know, this is something all of us can relate to, you know. Well, I thank you. I just recorded the audio book, y'all. I don't know yet when it's coming out, but I have family members who haven't read this book yet, and they said, well, when it comes out in audio, so it is going to be an audio book, you know.
So whether you read the book, which I recommend, I took lots of notes, as you could see, or wait for the Audible.
Talk about it though. Talk about
Yes.
the things that resonate with you, because my life is not the important thing. It's just some of the confusion of being young and trying to try on an expanded consciousness and not get stuck. Because I was stuck, but I didn't stay stuck too long. But I'd be in one headset for 2 years, and then I'd be in another headset, and I'm in another organization, and 2 years later, I'm doing, you know, but it's like this whole, that's why it's called Sojourner.
Sojourner, I was getting ready to say, thank you.
That's what, yeah.
Thank you, another Sojourner.
Yeah, you know, just keep on trying to expand our understanding of these very complex issues. That's what the goal of it really was.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We still have refreshments in the back. Please help yourselves. And thank you for attending.